Hello, everyone. You've tuned into People Know It, the podcast for people. This is season 2, the all inclusive table. You're listening to episode 15. I'm your host, Sanya Sharma. Please to follow the podcast on your favorite audio and video platform. And we're still quite new, so please do leave a comment. Welcome, everybody, to episode 15 of season 2. It has been an interesting start, and I'm glad that you have tuned into our next episode for the season 2. So, what did I promise to you in the last episode? I promised that I will talk about East-West personality. Now, what is East-West personality? I would say it's a personality and it's a perspective that's rooted in difference. And why did I come up with this description for the season? Well, it started with one question, which was, why do I feel so different? I don't know if you've ever had this question come up in your mind in social settings, when you're walking down the street, when you're surrounded by certain people, that I actually have a different take on that point. I see things a bit differently, or I think I am different to the people around me. I have had to ask this question to myself many times. And by many, I mean many times. And when I sat down to do a mapping exercise to figure out why do I constantly keep thinking that I'm different, or why do I always have a different perspective, the answer to that exercise led me to this thing or this term that is not new, that has been in existence, but I have tweaked it to suit my purpose, and I describe it as the East-West personality. So the East-West personality is a personality of transition, and the East-West perspective is a perspective of transition, something that has been through change. And by change, I mean something that has been through growth. So it starts at a point which is your East, where and it can be anything. So in many ways, it is metaphorical. And it is something that takes you to the West. And in a way, it's meant to be a satire because, we have been born in a world where the West has always been considered more developed than the East. So, in a way, it's trying to say, oh, look, I've started from my East and now I have moved to the West. But the twist is, you don't actually move from East to the West. The East-West perspective is one that is actually in the center of both East and the West. It is neither to East nor is it to West, but it has tried to imbibe the qualities and characteristics of both the East and the West. Is that a bit confusing? Well, I wouldn't be surprised because I have always been super confused throughout my journey because I've always found myself landing in a situation that is very different to who I am. For instance, I come from the state of Rajasthan. That is my lineage, where I originate from. And Rajasthan is a beautiful state. There are lots of palaces. The food is great. The textile is amazing. If you've heard of the bandhej print, it is super popular. Bangles made of lakh are super popular. The tourism is a big thing for people traveling to India. Rajasthan is a place where they go first. Both my Western friends and friends from the East. There is the dessert, there are sweets, there is dance, there is music. It's all in all a wonderful state. And that is the state. I'm proud that I belong to that state, and that is where my ancestors come from. But I actually ended up growing in the northeast of India. And that is completely different from Rajasthan. We don't have the desert. We have rivers, we have mountains, we have greenery, and we have rainfall, a lot of rainfall. People are different, the textile is different. So we have bandhej here in the West, and we have the Assam Muga silk in the Northeast. And that's just Assam. Northeast is made up of 7 states, and each state has its own distinct feature, both in terms of culture, language, food. So complete polar opposites. And that was one of my first experiments, growing in a setting which is so divorced from the culture that I'm supposed to belong to. Assam, in many ways, became my foster home, and a home that I came to love quite dearly because just how beautiful it is. People are very sweet, people are nice, and it has had a big influence on me growing up. So there's no wonder an element of the Assamese influence on me many times, way more than the influence of Rajasthan. So that was the first east-west shift that you do, or or at least I did in my life, was growing up trying to mold myself into the Assamese culture and more broadly the Northeast scenery and the Northeast way of living, whilst still keeping alive the Rajasthan culture in my household. But the complexity doesn't stop there. My household actually was not just Rajasthan. It also had influences from the south because that's where my mom grew up. And it also has influences from central India because that's where my grandparents spent a lot of time. So, in a way, it was a very pan India identity that I had to embrace very early on in my household, which was great because if secularism needed a model, then my house was the model for that. Uh, be it any festival, we celebrated everything. Now, I don't know if it's because I love for food or just a love for celebration or to have a good time. Be it Christmas, Holi, Eid, Diwali, the Assamese festivals, Halloween, we celebrate everything. Or at least I grew up celebrating everything in my household. So that way, our household pretty much reflected the ideals of the Indian constitution, secularism in all sense. It was quite liberating to grow up in that household. And that, in many ways, became or influenced the lens that you develop through which you start seeing the world. Because that household was also a culmination of different cultures crisscrossing, where you don't succumb to any one sort of polarization. There's a North Pole and South Pole. And the reason I'm not picking North South, I'm not describing myself as North South perspective or North South personality is because it's just depressing to define yourself like that. And because if I think of North and South more generally or globally, all I think about is Antarctica and Arctic, and that's just not populated with people. So, but when I think about East and West, I think that there is a scope to expand and capture more people in it rather than just the frozen poles of the world. So, East West is the term I'm going for. You can choose North and South if Arctic and Antarctic are your thing. I would love to be there, but East West is what I'm going for as it also ties in with my journey. So, as I said, that is where the first distillation of your perspective and your lens happens because you've been brought up in a place where you can't escape the mix of cultures, but you also have to got to find a way to root yourself in something. Because if you don't root yourself into something, you risk being nowhere. And I've always had that challenge. And I think the solution to that could be, well, maybe I should lean west, maybe I should lean east, because that's way more popular. But I thought, if I am feeling this way, there must be other people who are feeling the same way. And if we're all feeling the same way, in a way, we are a community. We are the East West community. We are people who have decided not to get polarized, but to maintain a more central identity. And that has influenced our perspective. And maybe that's why we think differently. And I was not wrong because when I read this more about Tavares's work, and I've been discussing his work and the exhibition since my last episode. I realized there are other people who go through similar thought process. And let me read out an extract for you. Strachan has described his creative process in general as an effort to redraw the maps of his own existence as someone who has been transported from the African continent. Speaking of Black solidarity in the wake of George Floyd protests in 2020, Strachan noted how, while we all came in ships from Africa, the ships just landed in different places. The black hair that Strachan has reworked into fanciful forms, not just in the square paintings, but also in the elaborate sculpted hairstyles that adorn a series of bronze and marble busts, are both the bodily remnants of the artist's extended personal network and a remapping of individuals scattered generations ago by slavery. So then I thought about people who have moved from different continents to a different continent, immigrants, who have had to leave their country and come to a different country and create a whole new life. All of us, in a way, are East West personalities because we have moved from a certain point in our life to a completely different point. And we know that we can never go back to the point from where we started. And we'll probably never truly be the West, whatever that West may be, because being that West means completely forgetting the East of our life. And at least I am not capable of doing that. Neither would I ever want to do it. Would I ever not want to be associated with my country? Absolutely not. Would I ever not want to be associated with my foster home, Assam? Absolutely not. But does that mean that I will never change or I will never grow and embrace aspects of my West that I think I like or are going to give me a better perspective? That is also a no from me. So it's a confusing identity to navigate. It's a confusing place to be in. But if someone asks you, what do you bring to the table? It's a very powerful thing to put on the table that what I bring with me is a lifetime of growth, of navigating differences, of transitioning. Because with that growth comes a very open minded personality and a personality that is capable of being, let me use my hand gestures, the umbrella for a lot of different people. Because you understand the East, you're willing to understand the West, and you're also open to how these two might integrate together. Not everyone has that flexibility, and I didn't know that until and unless I did a deep dive into my own perspective. What was that helping me do, and how I saw the lack of it affect others' perspectives and others' way of thinking. So, in a way, the East West personality or the East West perspective is a superpower. Now, here's the catch: everyone, to some extent in their life, I think, has an East West perspective. Maybe you have navigated a health crisis that makes you an East West person, or you have an East West story. Maybe you have navigated a challenging phase in your career. From maybe you were at the bottom and then you're to the top. That's again an East West story. Now, think about someone who has had to navigate many East to West journeys in their life. That is the alpha East to West personality. So, if you were to create a community and if you were to have an alpha in that East to West community, the alpha East to West person is that person who has had to do most traveling journeys from East to West, and they can be anything. Now, as a fun fact, let me give you my East to West story. A fun East to West story, which came very early on when I was very little in Assam. And the first East to West shift I made was becoming a reader in a family of non readers. So I love books, I've always loved reading. And the sad part was that I was born in a family of non readers where nobody really understood why I liked reading. And the struggle there was to convince members of my family that reading was a worthwhile exercise apart from academics, and books were worth investing into. Because that was constantly the question: what are these books for? What are you going to do with these books? You don't understand novels. Is there any need for it? You're free to do what you want. As I said, I grew up in a very liberal household, but books? Why do you need books? uh, so the way I started reading books was through the library, trying and sitting on a library and reading all the books that is to offer. Well, because no one can stop you in the library. And then I was lucky because I landed in a school where we used to have many competitions, and the prize for those competitions were books. So if you won those competitions, you would get books as a reward. No wonder I ended up finding things I was good at, also made sure I was winning them, my mother as an accomplice, helping me win those competitions. And I got all these books through which I started building my library. And then I was again lucky because my city, Guwahati, hosts this annual book fair. It's called the Anvesha Book Fair, which has many book stalls. And again, it's quite student centric. So they host a lot of competitions for students. And the prizes for winning those competitions, again, is book voucher. So if you win those book vouchers, you can go pick any book you want from from the book fair. Again, my very entrepreneurial brain decided it was a good way to build my book collection. So again, with the help of my mother, who was my accomplice in helping me prepare for these competitions and molding me into a presentable extempo speaker, poem recitation contestant, and just anything. I ended up winning many competitions in that book fair. I was a regular participant in the book fair, and that contributed or helped me build my library. And of course, then you grow up, and then your parents realize that reading is an essential part of your existence, and you find other ways to source books, get books, and then you end up choosing a profession where you have no option but to read books. So your parents have no option but to let you invest in books. But that is one of my very earliest east to west story, navigating my desire to read more books in a surrounding where people really didn't understand what purpose that served. And I think that definitely helps because it teaches you resourcefulness, and it teaches you different ways of doing things. And it also makes you appreciate difference in perspective. Like, not everybody will get why you do something. And it's up to you to make that happen if you really want it. And it teaches you to push through uh, situations and find that silver lining where you can make things happen. In a way, it also teaches you the audacity of hope, which I think is quite precious. And I think that, in a way, makes you an optimistic person. So, someone who has not had to fight for it or not had to think creatively as to how I can pursue a certain interest will probably not understand that and will not understand creativity. So, that is my very first east to west story as to how to become a book reader. So, next time, if someone tells you we don't understand how to read books, you can do what I did. Go and aim those competitions and get those book vouchers, and you will have a library like I have. This is a very small example of being an east to west personality. Obviously, since then, I ended up doing many different things. For instance, making a shift from Assam to Delhi for my law school. And that is what I'm going to talk about in the next episode. What was that shift? Why I made that shift? And what it taught me, the transition value of that shift, and how I adjusted to that shift and things I learned, because I think it's an important topic, especially for students who are looking to make that shift, who have made that shift. Some of the challenges you can face, should be facing. That's coming in for the next episode. Before I end this episode, cut. And again, there I would talk about how that east to west transition shaped me as a person. So there you go. That is the magic of being an east to west personality. The difference in perspective is the superpower. We'll continue talking about it in our coming episodes. And the next thing I'm going to touch upon is my east to west transition from a student in Assam to becoming a lawyer in Delhi. Now, I'm not technically Assamese, but I do think I have the credibility to talk about the challenges that it can pose for people doing that navigation. And it'll be interesting to discuss what that taught me, what I saw happening around me, and what I think people can learn through it. And as I've mentioned, I've always tried to keep the focus of my podcast and my work on skill building and capacity building. And in this episode and in the coming episodes, the specific skill that I'm trying to talk about or discuss is the skill of transition, because I think it's such an important skill. And look at it, it's so topical that I'm launching this season and these episodes in the season of autumn, which is a season of transition, and it symbolizes change, that we have to embrace change. But the question is, change at what cost? Change for who? And are we embracing change in a way that is diminishing our sense of identity? or is it enhancing our sense of identity? And for me, that is what the east to west debate is all about. And by maintaining a central identity, I'm arguing that we are embracing growth and change and transformation and transition, but in a way that is enhancing our sense of identity and helping us create ourselves rather than reduce ourselves to fit into one of these extreme molds of the East or the West. So that brings me to our quote of the day from our book, which is Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday. So today I'm actually going to read out one of his smaller chapters. It's called Which Tradition Will You Choose? And it's page 75 of his book. Here it starts. Imagine the sheer terror of existence for early man. Imagine what it was like to bring a child into a world with a survival rate of less than 50%. Imagine what it was like to be at the whim of kings as well as the elements, to have lived through depressions and disasters, wars, and the worries of an uncertain existence. And what did they do with all of this? They kept going, they did it anyway. People who walked over land bridges to new continents, who rebuilt after fires, who clinched on armor and ran into battle, who demanded inalienable rights from their governments, who stared down mobs, who stole away from slavery or lack of opportunity in the dead of night, who explored the frontiers of science, those people eventually, indirectly and directly created you. Their blood surges through your veins, their DNA is infused in yours. Even if you don't come from a famous family, even if you come from a persecuted minority, you come from fighters and survivors. You come from sturdy peasant stock, James Baldwin explained to his nephew. Men who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of most terrifying odds, achieved an unassailable and monumental dignity. Did he also come from people who had been afraid? Of course, we all do. But we choose whose tradition we are going to follow. I shall remind you of the dangers which our fathers have also been through, Xenophon told his fearful men, struck there in Persia, so that you realize that it is right for you to be brave, and that with the help of the gods, the brave find safety even from the worst difficulties. We must remember that history is not filled with fairy tales, but flesh and blood. Real people, people like you, people know better, certainly know healthier than you, squared up against fate, took her punches, threw their best shot. They failed, they made mistakes, they were knocked down, but they survived. They survived long enough to put in motion the events that carry us forward today. In some cases, they are quite literally our parents, in other cases, only figuratively so. There were cowards too, but we can write them out of the family tree. When we are afraid, we can look up at those who came before us. We can visit the monuments they erected. We can read the documents they wrote, because this is our tradition. They have passed us a baton. Will we accept it? When I'm no longer even a memory, just a name, you can hear an elderly Florence Nightingale saying, recorded on a wax tablet at the end of her life, quote, I hope that my voice may perpetuate the great work of my life. On that note, I'm going to sign off from this episode, and I will see you in our next episode. Stay tuned.